I'm your king of this whole planet. I'm going to rule this whole world.
There it is, there it is, there it is, there it is, there it is.
I'm talking to you. Somebody's going to get hurt.
It now appears there may be as many as 780 bodies total found at the site.
I believe that those who are inside are not bad people. They were simply terminally misled.
Let's fill this atmosphere with warmth and love.
Laughter for no reason.
For our Father offers you life. Not talking about human life.
People play games, friend. They lie.
Powers you control. I'm your king of this whole planet. I'm going to rule this whole world.
There it is, there it is, there it is, there it is, there it is.
I'm talking to you. Somebody's going to get hurt.
It now appears there may be as many as 780 bodies total found at the site.
I believe that those who are inside are not bad people. They were simply terminally misled.
Let's fill this atmosphere with warmth and love.
Laughter for no reason.
For our Father offers you life. Not talking about human life.
People play games, friend. They lie.
Powers you control. I'm your king of this whole planet. I'm going to rule this whole world.
There it is, there it is, there it is, there it is, there it is.
I'm talking to you. Somebody's going to get hurt.
It now appears there may be as many as 780 bodies total found at the site.
I believe that those who are inside are not bad people. They were simply terminally misled.
Let's fill this atmosphere with warmth and love.
Laughter for no reason.
For our Father offers you life. Not talking about human life.
People play games, friend. They lie.
Powers you control. I'm your king of this whole planet. I'm going to rule this whole world.
There it is, there it is, there it is, there it is, there it is.
I'm talking to you. Somebody's going to get hurt.
It now appears there may be as many as 780 bodies total found at the site.
I believe that those who are inside are not bad people. They were simply terminally misled.
Let's fill this atmosphere with warmth and love.
Laughter for no reason.
For our Father offers you life. Not talking about human life.
People play games, friend. They lie.
Powers you control. I'm your king of this whole planet. I'm going to rule this whole world.
There it is, there it is, there it is, there it is, there it is.
I'm talking to you. Somebody's going to get hurt.
It now appears there may be as many as 780 bodies total found at the site.
I believe that those who are inside are not bad people. They were simply terminally misled.
Let's fill this atmosphere with warmth and love.
Laughter for no reason.
For our Father offers you life. Not talking about human life.
People play games, friend. They lie.
Powers you control. I'm your king of this whole planet. I'm going to rule this whole world.
There it is, there it is, there it is, there it is, there it is.
I'm talking to you. Somebody's going to get hurt.
It now appears there may be as many as 780 bodies total found at the site.
I believe that those who are inside are not bad people. They were simply terminally misled.
Let's fill this atmosphere with warmth and love.
Laughter for no reason.
For our Father offers you life. Not talking about human life.
People play games, friend. They lie.
Powers you control. I'm your king of this whole planet. I'm going to rule this whole world.
There it is, there it is, there it is, there it is, there it is.
I'm talking to you. Somebody's going to get hurt.
It now appears there may be as many as 780 bodies total found at the site.
I believe that those who are inside are not bad people. They were simply terminally misled.
Let's fill this atmosphere with warmth and love.
Laughter for no reason.
For our Father offers you life. Not talking about human life.
People play games, friend. They lie.
Powers you control. I'm your king of this whole planet. I'm going to rule this whole world.
There it is, there it is, there it is, there it is, there it is.
I'm talking to you. Somebody's going to get hurt.
It now appears there may be as many as 780 bodies total found at the site.
I believe that those who are inside are not bad people. They were simply terminally misled.
Let's fill this atmosphere with warmth and love.
Laughter for no reason.
For our Father offers you life. Not talking about human life.
People play games, friend. They lie.
Powers you control. I'm your king of this whole planet. I'm going to rule this whole world.
There it is, there it is, there it is, there it is, there it is.
I'm talking to you. Somebody's going to get hurt.
It now appears there may be as many as 780 bodies total found at the site.
I believe that those who are inside are not bad people. They were simply terminally misled.
Let's fill this atmosphere with warmth and love.
Laughter for no reason.
For our Father offers you life. Not talking about human life.
People play games, friend. They lie.
Powers you control. I'm your king of this whole planet. I'm going to rule this whole world.
There it is, there it is, there it is, there it is, there it is.
I'm talking to you. Somebody's going to get hurt.
It now appears there may be as many as 780 bodies total found at the site.
I believe that those who are inside are not bad people. They were simply terminally misled.
Let's fill this atmosphere with warmth and love.
Laughter for no reason.
For our Father offers you life. Not talking about human life.
People play games, friend. They lie.
Powers you control. I'm your king of this whole planet. I'm going to rule this whole world.
There it is, there it is, there it is, there it is, there it is.
I'm talking to you. Somebody's going to get hurt.
It now appears there may be as many as 780 bodies total found at the site.
I believe that those who are inside are not bad people. They were simply terminally misled.
Let's fill this atmosphere with warmth and love.
Laughter for no reason.
For our Father offers you life. Not talking about human life.
People play games, friend. They lie.
Powers you control. I'm your king of this whole planet. I'm going to rule this whole world.
There it is, there it is, there it is, there it is, there it is.
I'm talking to you. Somebody's going to get hurt.
It now appears there may be as many as 780 bodies total found at the site.
I believe that those who are inside are not bad people. They were simply terminally misled.
Let's fill this atmosphere with warmth and love.
Laughter for no reason.
For our Father offers you life. Not talking about human life.
People play games, friend. They lie.
Powers you control. I'm your king of this whole planet. I'm going to rule this whole world.
There it is, there it is, there it is, there it is, there it is.
I'm talking to you. Somebody's going to get hurt.
It now appears there may be as many as 780 bodies total found at the site.
I believe that those who are inside are not bad people. They were simply terminally misled.
Let's fill this atmosphere with warmth and love.
Laughter for no reason.
For our Father offers you life. Not talking about human life.
People play games, friend. They lie.
Powers you control. I'm your king of this whole planet. I'm going to rule this whole world.
There it is, there it is, there it is, there it is, there it is.
I'm talking to you. Somebody's going to get hurt.
It now appears there may be as many as 780 bodies total found at the site.
I believe that those who are inside are not bad people. They were simply terminally misled.
Hello everybody and welcome to my live stream for International Cult Awareness Day 2022. I'm your speaker Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast, and I'm going to give everybody a little bit of time to sit down, get comfortable, log in, find the stream. Anybody that decides to tune in, if you could give the share button a little bit of a click and post it on your social media pages, I would deeply appreciate that. Oh, awesome. Thank you so much, Juko, for letting me know that the sound levels are good. Some of you may not know, but I had an issue with my laptop a couple of weeks ago and had to go out and get a new one, which also then corrupted. So this is a new one, and hopefully everything looks okay from there. I've got a little bit of a schedule for the stream today, which is going to look at some particularly prevalent moments in history around cult activity before going into this week's news segment. And then hopefully I can cut that in half and then there'll be a separate video later on for Cult News 14. Oh, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing the stream everywhere. I appreciate that. And I know that it's a weird time zone, so there might not be too many people that drop in today, and that's also okay because people can watch back on this later on. And I'm using OBS for the first time, which is quite scary, but good to be learning things at the same time. So I hope everybody's had a great Friday and that some of you are looking forward to going into the weekend. If you are listening from America and you have Thanksgiving plans, let me know what they are. I'm sure that it's going to be a great holiday for everybody now that we are really back to normal after lockdown for the first time in sort of 2 or 3 years. So people could have plans in any part of the world and probably be allowed to travel to see people to commit to those plans, which is awesome. I'm gonna get into the stream in just a second. I'm glad everything's looking okay. My children are still awake, so we might hear some hustle and bustle coming from them in the next few minutes or so. But that is okay. There we go. Everything's looking good. Everything's sounding good. Just gonna... Right. Okay, well, I will get into things now. And we can start looking at some of this stuff that I wanted to discuss for International Cult Awareness Day. I was due to have an interview today with somebody who wanted to talk about the Carbon Nation cult and Nature Boy, who was recently arrested and charged on a number of different charges and felonies. Interestingly, it's one of the only groups that I've looked at that focuses on or has a focus on Black, Indigenous and persons of colour. A lot of the time when we look at high demand groups throughout time, there's an influx, particularly in the counterculture movement, where it's a lot of Caucasian and white people involved in high demand religious groups or high demand groups and coercive environments. So it was interesting learning about a group that is anti-white, has a lot of Black power iconography, but still a lot of the same coercive tactics, especially around coercion around women's bodies and sexuality, and a lot of the allegations against Nature Boy were inclusive of kidnapping and imprisoning individuals, women, and also revenge porn, which was something that a former member came forward to talk to newspapers about, which of course is all horrible stuff. So that was an interesting group. If you haven't looked into that group, that's Carbon Nation. Hi Michael, so good to see you. Hi. Oh, great. Yeah, that's so good that there's more videos being made about Carbon Nation. It's really an interesting group, and interesting that the leader was arrested. There really hasn't been that much in the news about it, but as soon as there is an update, I will let everybody know. So, in aid of International Cult Awareness Day today, I will be looking at some infamous groups and significant moments within these groups that have contributed to the narrative of cults, cultic abuse and tactics, and created a vat of misconception around the types of people that join cults and what a cult truly is. I think everybody has a different definition for that word. I think if you've been involved in a cultic group, that could hold a completely different definition or different weight to individuals that have had those experiences. I think that a lot of people might just go straight to dictionaries to use the various different terminology that you can find from the various different sorry, I'm just sorting my screen out, from the various different definitions that are offered. I think it used to be restricted to talking about religious groups, but now there are varying definitions in different dictionaries that offer terms that encapsulate groups and charismatic leaders, which I think is important. Despite the misconceptions that have been created over time, the events that took place to create perhaps a skewed perception of what cults truly are, the events were extremely tragic. And with each event that accumulated a huge loss of life through alleged suicide, I think there are some people out there that would argue that no cult member that completed suicide within the cultic environment really could have completed suicide, but that's something that I think could be discussed at length another time, especially in cases where suicide was determined to be the cause of death. Sometimes there are circumstances where individuals die in high demand groups and it's put down to natural causes. When looking at the facts of the case, it looks as though that's not a fair cause of death. Notably, there's a case some of you may have seen that is going on at the moment where a family in the UK has asked for their daughter's remains to be exhumed after it was brought to them that she had died in suspicious circumstances over in Kenya when she went to visit her husband's family. So that's an ongoing thing that's happening in the UK at the moment. Mike was saying, my greatest question is how people choose cults, having been kidnapped, forced into one. I think that's interesting. Somebody positioned it to me at the recent International Cultic Studies Association conference last year. What was attractive about the group? What led you to the group in the first place, or what attracted you to the group in the first place? Instead of saying to people, why did you join a cult? I think that perhaps there are different ways we could phrase that question that would give us an insightful and interesting answer without making individuals feel like they're being attacked. So I think it was Mark Vicente actually said, nobody joins a cult, they join a good thing. And I think that could be true of a lot of the groups that we discuss on the show, although not always the case, of course. And so, kind of my rambling aside, sorry, I will be bringing this week's cult news as well as some other bits of information, answering any questions that you have along the way. If you're watching this on the 18th of November, as it is live, feel free to ask any questions or put any thoughts or comments into the chat box, because sometimes channels may say that they are live, but it's not a live feed. It's a pre-recorded video that they've put as a live video, which I do use that feature at times. But this is actually me. If you're watching as it is shown as live, I am here, so please feel free to put anything that you would like to discuss in the chat box, or just thoughts, streams of consciousness as we go through some of this information. I think that's an interesting question, Michael, that you've put in the chat box. False presentations, absolutely. There's so many different things that spring to my mind when I think about how a group positions itself one way and then changes its position once somebody is integrated into a group. For example, if somebody wants to join the Hare Krishna movement, when members of ISKCON approach people on the street and the people say, well, I'm a practicing Christian, they are often told that it doesn't really matter what religion you practice, because the Hare Krishnas focus on something bigger than, earthly religions. And then, of course, you find out that you devote your entire life to Krishna, or Prabhupada, really, as a cult of personality, from what I've managed to ascertain from my personal research into the Hare Krishnas. I think the same goes with Shinchunji, for example. You go through 12 weeks of Bible study at what seems like typical classes until it's revealed to you that the Messiah is actually a South Korean man here on earth called Lee Man-hee. And you are to accept him as your Lord and Savior. So that information is really withheld from you for a really long time. There are people that are implemented into the groups to keep an eye on you and feed back information to the leaders, and they are like spies almost. So they don't tell you that they are already integrated members of Shinchunji. They tell you that they are also new to the Bible study and they're really looking forward to learning more. So it's really nefarious cloak and dagger tactics that they use. There's so much that comes out of false presentations, Michael, that I could just go on for hours, just drawing on so many different things that come to mind when I think about that as one thing. And of course, there are so many groups that we've heard about on the show where things change, and people have already sold their properties, have given up all their earthly goods, have followed somebody to the ends of the earth, and then the more damaging practices start to come into play. I think about Mary Mahoney talking to me about her experiences in the Children of God. She joined as a teenager, and things changed after she'd moved away, and, you know, she'd given up her passport and all of her papers, and they were living in these countries not illegally. I think a lot of them, well, not always illegally. A lot of people had the correct papers, but even that is just one example of being so far into a group at that point that it's not as easy as saying, okay, I need to leave, because sometimes physically you can't leave. Sometimes practically, financially, if you have children. There's a little segment in today's talk about how families are encouraged to have more and more and more and more children whose childcare is wrapped up in the group and your financial support is wrapped up in the group. So I mean, the list is endless, and isn't that why this subject is so difficult? And really, I could just go on and on. So I will leave that there. Sorry, went on a little bit of a tangent. But I think it's absolutely fascinating myself, Michael, and I often find myself asking those questions. Thank you, Sam, for hopping on with your hotspot on the train to say a big thank you. Thank you for coming on the show recently and sharing your story. There's been some really wonderful feedback from other people that were involved in the same group and people that have had similar experiences in a destructive youth group with a religious aspect. So thank you so much for hopping on to share your thank yous there as well. To anyone that listens today that has survived a cult, this is in recognition of you and your loved ones and your allies and the educators. I hope that every single conversation that is happening in the world around cults exposes them further and brings down more abusive leaders. I think conversations can help change misconceptions and prevent further harm. And some of this conversation is happening because of some of the tragic events in the past that we will talk about today. Even if those tragic events have muddied the water a little bit in terms of identifying cults and the victims and the leaders of cults too. And what I mean by that is, going back to my own personal journey through learning about cults, as I've often said, there were times where I thought I knew everything about cults, and that was from watching a few documentaries, reading a few true crime books, and really kind of knowing the more sensationalized aspects of cults. And now I realize that really cults and coercion are all around us all of the time, and any of us could fall victim to the tactics and schemes that con people, con artists, mass manipulators, malignant narcissists, or all of the above put together to create these really toxic and malignant, destructive, all the words I've already used, cultic environments. So that's kind of what I mean by that when I say that the really notable events from history have muddied the waters in that way. I think somebody said to me the other day, I used to think that there was a cult once every 10 years. And I feel like the cases that we're going to talk about today are perhaps why that misconception exists if you haven't had first-hand experience. So we're going to start with the Branch Davidians, which are a shoot-off of Seventh-day Adventism, which was founded in 1955 by Benjamin Roden, whose wife took over from him in 1978 when Benjamin Roden died. The group settled in a location called Mount Carmel in Waco, Texas, which was a large compound that would eventually have multiple buildings with different functions and quite a large population. It was assumed that Lois's son George would take over as successor in the leadership of the Branch Davidians after his mother's leadership ended, either through her death or her retirement. But things weren't as straightforward as they would have been because of the arrival of a new member called Vernon Howell. He came to the compound in 1981, and he was immediately charismatic and charming, and he set his sights on Lois Roden. He told her that he wanted to have a baby with her, and that baby would be the chosen one. After many disputes between Howell and George Roden, they decided that they would have it out with one final battle where they would each prove that they were worthy of leadership by bringing a deceased person back to life. So at one point, they were exhuming decades-old bodies in an effort to bring someone back to life. And when none of that happened, Vernon Howell actually reported George Roden to authorities and then would lead a small group of followers to bear semi-automatic weapons and attempt a takeover of Mount Carmel, which eventually led to Vernon Howell being taken to court and eventually found not guilty and released on all charges. But Howell didn't need to compete with George Roden for long, because eventually Lois Roden would award leadership to Vernon Howell. When she was in her 60s, she was in a sexual relationship with Vernon Howell, who was in his 20s. And when she gave him the role of leadership, he took the name David Koresh. Koresh being the Hebrew word for Cyrus, Koresh proclaimed that he had ties to King David and Cyrus the Great, and his dictatorship came quickly into place. As recollections that are now public by former members revealed his systematic sexual abuse of women and children, and in some details men too. Koresh married himself to multiple women, broke up marriages, married himself to children, and forced himself upon them sexually. There was no running water or electricity at times, and people were living in utter poverty under the worst conditions inside Mount Carmel. Eventually, this environment and all of this abuse would come to a crescendo when the Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms Agency, along with the FBI, attempted to execute a search warrant on the property on February the 28th, 1993. The group had been stockpiling weapons and ammunition in preparation for one of Koresh's wild doomsday prophecies that he believed was going to come true, and subsequently so did his followers. What followed from this I lost my place there. The initial raid ended in 4 ATF agents being killed and a further 16 being injured. And what followed from this was a 51-day siege that ended on the 19th of April 1993, when the government agencies carried out their final attack against the compound. There is a conspiracy theory on whether the government purposefully or accidentally set the fatal fires that day, but the results showed that out of 85 branch Davidians on the compound that day, 76 of them died, including many, many children. And we let this day today be a reminder of all of the lives that were lost in this event and all of the people that fell victim to David Koresh. Another group that is linked to Seventh-day Adventism is the Anthill Kids, which was a small Canadian cult led by Rock Terrio, a man well versed in the Old Testament who took its teachings literally from a very young age. Someone's just put an interesting comment in there about the FBI's MO. Yes, I've watched a lot of footage that is convincing of the raid, the fires during the siege on Waco being something that the government agencies did carry out on purpose. It's very compelling. I can pop a link in the description after the stream if people would find that interesting. Rock Terrio took the Old Testament teachings very seriously from a young age. he grew up in a religious household and went on to become a Seventh-day Adventist. He would go around evangelizing and handing out propaganda from the Seventh-day Adventists in an attempt to get people to come along. After having a fallout with local members of his SDA church, Theriot took a small group of faithful followers and encouraged them to start collecting money from loved ones and Social Security, engaging in polyamory, breaking up marriages, and encouraging members to go and steal from local food shops and stores to provide for their impoverished group. After the health food store and alternative medicine clinic that Theriot was running fell apart, he took his followers to several isolated locations in the rural woodlands of Quebec in 1978 onwards. 1978, as we know, is a pinnacle year for cult tragedy, and it would be in these isolated environments that Theriot would commit some of the most heinous acts on all of his followers. And I won't go into details about this because it was really difficult for me to complete this series for the Patreon exclusives, and I don't feel like revisiting some of that stuff, so I'll just give you a brief overview without going into too much detail. But it consists of things like chopping off members' body parts, breaking legs with sledgehammers, making members sit on burning stoves, throwing axes at children who were pinned on trees, castrating people without the right medical instruments or knowledge, horrific abuse of children and newborn babies. If you want more details, you can look them up, but Theriot became involved with some shunned polygamous Mormon figures who encouraged him on doctrines around multiple wives and really fed into Rock Theriot's skewed ideas that women were objects and there for his benefit, which just really caused things to reach really based levels of just human depravity. This case is also frustrating because of the legal ineptitude. There were so many times where members were arrested and set free, and there were agencies who came and took the children away and then gave the children back, and there were times where the court ordered individuals to stay away from one another, but they would all just use loopholes to reunite in a different part of Canada, and just really frustrating to, it's kind of like when you read about Manson, who just didn't get caught again and again and again. But Theriot, who called himself Moses at this point after sitting on top of a hill and claiming that God spoke with him in the same fashion as Moses in the Bible, he was charged and eventually imprisoned. And he did die in prison when a fellow inmate stabbed him in the neck with a shiv. But many people died under Rock Theriot, and most notably children, infants, and newborn babies within the Anthill Kids. And adults died too, horrific, horrible deaths. And we let this day today be a reminder of all that was lost within that group. Another group that formed out of French-speaking Canada around the same time was the Order of the Solar Temple, which was a shoot-off of the Knights Templar, which was born during the Crusades and changed over the years. The Order of the Solar Temple, which was inspired by the Knights Templar, was led by Luc Jouret and Joseph de Mambro. So there are like two layers to this group. There's people that took part on a sort of basic level, who kind of went to some of the talks, and then there were people who were pretty wealthy and had good standing in society who were really in that inner circle. And the way that they were able to do that was using Jouret's knowledge of homeopathy and alternative medicine and de Mambro's knowledge of secret societies. Jouret had travelled the world learning about alternative medicine, and Joseph de Mambro had been involved in several secret societies. So that, along with his esotericism, it is that group, Steve. Yeah, the one in Canada, France, and Switzerland, in those years, and a bit earlier as well. But those dates, 93 and 94, quite significant. Sorry. So with de Mombro's knowledge of secret societies and esotericism, along with their combined knowledge of the so-called New Age, they created small chapters of their movement throughout Canada, Switzerland, and France. Eventually, when their greed and abuse became too much for members in that upper inner circle, de Mombro's declining health and a number of people coming forward to expose some of the false teachings and some of the, well, one of de Mombro's children went into a wardrobe at one point and pulled out a box of de Mombro's tricks, saying this is how he makes it look like this and this is how he makes it look like that. So basically just pointing their father out as a con artist. But all of this led to members breaking off to be in relationships with one another, which was not allowed because de Mombro paired people up and based it on spiritual teachings. He would say that they were a different type of human. They were an elite human, and the purpose of pairing people up was that they would go on to have elite children that de Mombro needed to help his child usher in the new age, which was Emanuela's job on Earth. So hi, Catherine, thank you. Also in the GMT time zone, nice to see you. It's a good time to tune into a stream on a Friday evening. Let me just check my tweets quickly. Just checking up on the Danny Masterson trial, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a little while during the cult news segment. So the couples started to get frustrated when they became interested in one another and would be shut down. Leadership would tell them that they couldn't be in relationships. So eventually there was a couple who broke away from the Order of the Solar Temple and stayed together. They were the Dutours, and the Dutours went on to have a baby together. They made a huge mistake in the eyes of Joseph de Mombro when they named their child Emmanuel. Emmanuel was off limits because de Mombro's child was called Emanuela, who was supposed to be this deity on earth who would usher in the new age. So de Mombro's leap was that Emmanuel must be the Antichrist. So he sent some devout followers over to their house. And one evening, those followers would brutally murder both the Dutours and their newborn child before placing the baby into a closet. Following this, Jouret and de Mombro had convinced their inner circle that they must complete their final descent to reach Sirius A, and Sirius A is the brightest star in the sky. In order to escape the incoming apocalypse, they needed to go on a final descent. And some members were told what a final descent was, and some members weren't. At a supposed Last Supper, 15 members completed suicide. 30 were murdered by bullets or smothering. 8 others died from the fire that was carefully started by timed devices set up strategically around the building to cover up evidence of what had taken place. But that didn't work because authorities discovered a small number of victims in the burnt building before realizing that the building was too big for just that room. And eventually one officer found that there was like a hidden partition or wall. And upon moving that wall, they found the rest of the bodies in a strange, somewhat star formation. This particular event took place in Switzerland, and it did include the bodies of Luc Jouret and Joseph de Mombro. But despite that, another 16 bodies would be found in a similar star formation months later in France, with 5 more members being found dead in March of 97. These 5 consisted of young teens who people believe to be the children of already deceased members of the group, and therefore the last remaining teens of the group who were murdered by the final remaining adults of the Order of the Solar Temple. In total, 53 people would die within the events that unfolded in the Order of the Solar Temple. And one of the things that struck me the most about this group, which makes my skin crawl every time I think about it, there was a conversation that was recorded between Luc Jouret and Joseph de Mombro where they talk about the siege on Waco. And one of them says, they got there before us. And the other one responds saying, we'll do it better, which I just think is so disgustingly callous and awful. So 53 people. And we use this day today to remember those individuals that were victims to the Order of the Solar Temple. Oh, just going to have a little bit of a break. Steve's in Chicago. Hi. How's the pizza? Kind of like Heaven's Gate, Steve. I do think the Order of the Solar Temple, there was a big movement, a kind of the New Age movement that came out of the 60s and 70s. It morphed into like UFO astrology influenced groups. And so when you think about Heaven's Gate, which is often labeled as a UFO doomsday cult, I would often think about the Order of the Solar Temple, but I would put them more in sort of like a hidden secret society esoteric group, like the one that Sharon Gans was running in America, in New York. I would place it, and Boston as well, I would place it more in esotericism than a UFO group. I think Marshall Applewhite truly believed in that belief system. I don't think that Joseph de Mombro and Luc Jouret believed that at all. It was all really just about the image to them. They were, well, Joseph de Mombro especially was an actor. It was all about trickery and magic, and I mean, all of these groups that we're talking about today, I've done Patreon exclusives on. If anybody would like to listen to them in detail, they are available, or I've got them on my hard drive, so they are around. Just checking in on these comments. Yes. When I just reading the comment about Haduko having 2 hate websites. Yeah, I mean, he's a special character. He needs 2 smear sites, not just 1, because he's doing so much exposing of various different groups. So yeah, I mean, we're waiting for the 3rd one. Maybe we'll have it by Christmas. We'll see. But yeah, I think must really be giving some groups a headache to dedicate that much time and effort into targeting somebody like that. I mean, fair game, isn't that what they say? Oh, thanks, Graham and Kathy, for popping that. Devil in Ohio. I was going to watch it, but I just finished a really long segment on Patreon about the Satanic Panic, and I really felt like a break. But maybe I can go back and revisit that now that I've had a bit of a break from the Satanic Panic. And then I watched Stranger Things, so anybody that's watched that will know that that was the focus of their most recent series as well. So we've spoken about the Branch Davidians, we've spoken about the Anthill Kids, we've spoken about the Order of the Solar Temple. I'm going to talk now about a Japanese doomsday cult that was led by Shoko Asahara, who grew up in extreme poverty with many siblings and was born with a type of glaucoma that left him completely blind in one eye and partially blind in the other. He was eventually sent to a school for the blind, where it was noted by many other pupils who attended the school that he was a bully, and he used his ability to see at least a little against those who couldn't see at all, which is quite telling, really, because later he went on to find his own destructive cult, and was actually put to death in July 2018 following his orders to carry out the murder of a family and the sarin gas attacks in the Tokyo subway stations on the trains. And there were a ton of acts of terrorism which are not even widely reported. There is a website. I'll put the link in the description of the episode once I've finished. It lists like hundreds of different attacks that Aum Shinrikyo carried out that were either successful or not successful, and that's why they weren't reported. But there were people that were reporting to the local council that they were getting headaches, that their vision felt impaired, like being in a house where there's like a carbon monoxide leak. People were asking for the air to be tested, and it turns out that there were different buildings that were being taken over by Aum Shinrikyo, where they were trying to develop or weaponize different things that they could use on people in political parties, on lawyers, on members of the public. And they got raided at one point, and one of the buildings that law enforcement entered was like thick with like this sludge on the walls where all of the gas had just stuck to the inside of the building, and you know, they had to wear like full suits entering the building. And you know, there's so much more to all of these stories that I'm not going to have time to mention today. But Asahara grew his following from throwing together themes of mysticism, astrology, religious ideologies, and alternative medicine. He was educated in acupuncture and used this along with magic trickery to convince followers that he could levitate. And there are some interesting pictures of him doing this. And therefore he must be truly enlightened and special. He also created an anime series as part of his propaganda drive, and some of that's still available to watch as well, and is quite interesting. And upon initiation into Aum Shinrikyo, recruits were expected to participate in strange rituals that included consuming some of Asahara's blood, and going through this bathing cleanse where people were expected to get in bathtubs full of extremely hot water. And a number of followers died from this ritual within Aum Shinrikyo, but I'm not sure that that was ever brought to the attention of law enforcement, or at least nobody was held accountable for the deaths that happened in that way. Eventually, Asahara would attempt to get his followers into government, but all attempts for Aum Shinrikyo to get into office were met with significantly low votes. And after being sued by a lawyer named Satsumi Sakamoto, Asahara had this lawyer murdered along with his wife and his young child. They broke into the apartment without any prior warning and just took the lives of the whole family right there and then. Eventually, on June 27th, 1994, Asahara coordinated multiple attacks across the Japanese subway system, releasing bags of sarin gas on board various packed trains during Japan's rush hour. I don't know if you have ever seen what Japan looks like during rush hour, but I mean, I'm in the UK and our population number is, of course, significantly lower than Japan's, but it's really something to see how their public transport system operates. And after these various different bags were released, 8 people died and 500 more people were injured. People talked about suffering from varying degrees of injury, from blindness to full body paralysis. This was later known as the Matsumoto incident after Asahara's birth name, which is Shizuo Matsumoto. This was among many attacks carried out by the group, and there are at least 13 known deaths associated with this group. Many, many more people are living with the physical and psychological scars of Asahara's reign of terror. And we use this day today to remember all of those people. Actually, there's a book by Murakami that was suggested to me by one of my patrons named Underground, and it's a non-fiction book where Murakami collects first-hand testimonies from people that were there that day, who were affected themselves or got phone calls that their loved ones had died from the attacks, and it's really an insightful and telling book, and I do recommend people go and have a read of that. So next we are on to Heaven's Gate. Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles came together to create the UFO doomsday cult known as Heaven's Gate. Applewhite grew up in an extremely Christian environment and served in the US Army. He suppressed his homosexuality and eventually would enter a same-sex relationship with one of his students when he was a lecturer of music at the University of St. Thomas in Houston, Texas. This would eventually become public knowledge and put Applewhite in a position where he had to resign from the university and quickly became the scandalous talk of the religious town. His father, whom he'd idolized his whole life, subsequently shunned him and died a year later before they could repair their relationship. And Applewhite apparently did not take this well and sunk into a deep depression. And it was around this time that he met Bonnie Nettles. From what I could read about Bonnie Nettles, there was always some hint of potential ill mental health, and when the two of them came together, they developed a type of folie à deux, where they really bolstered each other's extreme belief systems, and together they started claiming that they were mystical divine messengers on Earth. And together they would tour, give talks, and amassed a following based on what they were talking about and their teachings. They renamed themselves T and Doe, and talked about being connected to each other in a previous life where they were also in a partnership. Eventually, Nettles died, which caused both Applewhite and his followers a great deal of confusion and stress, as they believed that they were extraterrestrials. And the extraterrestrials were coming from space to provide them with new bodies. Eventually, the group moved into an isolated mansion where the controlled environment became more severe, where each member practiced absolute celibacy and some even castrated themselves. They started to focus on the approaching Hale-Bopp comet, and Applewhite ascertained that this was the group's true way to ascend to their heaven in the sky and access their new bodies. There were talks of a spaceship accompanying the comet, and that they needed to ascend at the time that the comet passed Earth so that they could get on board that spaceship. And so the way to ascend was to complete suicide. This mass suicide took place in October of 1996 after Applewhite released a somewhat eerie last chance to evacuate Earth video, which is available for people to watch online. 36 bodies were discovered on March the 26th, each person wearing identical clothing, laying across multiple bunk beds. Those who had completed a so-called final exit included the body of Marshall Applewhite, and we use today as a reminder of those who fell victim to Heaven's Gate. Juko saying folly ado. Yeah, it's interesting to look at some cases where it's been reported. It's a really interesting phenomenon to research, but the devastating effect of two people coming together and that environment being created, or that mind space being encouraged, is just, I mean, I often think about Fred and Rose West and just how do these people find each other. It's really unfortunate. Right, so I'm going to take a short break and then we will continue. So please feel free to put any questions in the chat. Yeah, that's interesting, Juko, actually. Yeah, I just had I was just contacted by Diane Sawyer, interestingly, on my YouTube channel, and Sawyer himself, so I'm hoping that he will offer to come and chat with me on the show at some point about his version of events regarding Heaven's Gate and the aftermath. So, yes, I'll be back in 2 minutes. Okay, I have returned. So let's continue. Gosh, it's some heavy stuff. Right, so moving on from Heaven's Gate to Charles Manson. Charles Manson was a man who led multiple people astray through a childhood of boys' schools and incarceration, a lack of love and stability. Manson grew up around criminals and the underbelly of society, learning how to manipulate people to get what he wants. He listed the Church of Scientology as his official religion on prison documents, and he also spent time being influenced by the Process Church of the Final Judgment, which are a really interesting group if you look into them a bit further. Manson studied the Bible inside out and picked the brains of mobsters and the mafioso when he was imprisoned alongside them, reading books on how to manipulate people and things like Dianetics as well. Upon his eventual release from prison, which was like decades later, he moved into the counterculture hippie movement of LA, where he was really able to thrive as a manipulator, con man, extortioner, all of those things. He was just really in the right place at the right time for how much of a monster he was. And he preyed on the disenchanted and seeking youth of America, notably young women running from home in search of freedom, fame, or even excitement, through a process of isolation and drugs and skewed beliefs and charisma and confidence and sexual coercion. And having some friends in high Hollywood places, like Dennis Wilson, for example, Manson really cultivated a group of absolute devotion to him, who would go on to murder so many people. Gary Hinman, Wojtek Frykowski, Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, Stephen Parent, Leno LaBianca, Rosemary LaBianca, Donald Shea, and Sharon Tate and her unborn 8-month-old baby. It is highly likely that the Manson family were responsible for many more murders that haven't officially been tied to them. But the members were under the duress and dictation of Manson himself. I've done a huge series on Charles Manson, and I'm not going to go into too much more detail today. But we use today to recognize all of the victims who fell prey to Manson's manipulation and those who found themselves at the brutal hands of the so-called Manson family. And lastly, we're going to talk about something that is quite difficult to speak about on this segment. And that is the reason why I'm doing this live stream for today, which is International Cult Awareness Day. And that is because of Jim Jones and the People's Temple. James Warren Jones grew up in a religious environment. His father was a preacher in Indiana, and Jim Jones took to scripture from a very young age. He learnt the Bible back to back and was even reported preaching to his school friends or rallying up the kids in his street and giving sermons to them. Eventually, this would take Jones to the streets of Indiana, notably in marginalized neighborhoods, which included those of Black, Indigenous, and persons of color communities, to preach the word of God. And this was strategic on Jones's part when he would preach to those on the edges of society due to segregation laws that were in place in America at that time. Jones would give followers a show of his agenda by actually being instrumental in desegregation in parts of America, which is pretty wild when you consider what he was inevitably responsible for. Like, he really did make positive change in the world before things went way, way, way too far. Things had gone too far before they even left America. But Jim Jones was a strange and complicated character. At one point, he was even selling monkeys door to door. And there are just things that you can look up about this person who is, I think it's one of the clear-cut cases of watching somebody preach and realizing that they say a lot without saying really anything at all, but the charisma is still there. So eventually, the group would find their own church building and move into that and really harness the ideas of desegregation. It seemed that in the first church, anybody was welcome, anybody could come along. Jones was charismatic and charming and had people under his spell very, very quickly. The group continued to grow, moving to Los Angeles to create its first community, where people could visit doctors, dentists, and even drop their children off at nursery. But Jones started to get paranoid. The success and the following and the absolute devotion that he had from all of his followers, it really became too much, and he had doomsday prophecies about the end of America and needing to escape. This just escalated, and after searching for a place to take his group away from the prying eyes of the growing media interest, and from worrying family members who weren't in the group, Jones finally settled on an isolated piece of land in the hidden jungle of Guyana. After visiting and contemplating various other locations, including Brazil, Jones preached about his rainbow family, adopting children of various ethnicities and using different tactics to create this perfect picture of himself as a person and his group and his following, before he joined hundreds of members who had already headed over to South America. They went ahead to prepare it for their great leader's arrival. And the reason that some people went ahead and some people went after Jones had arrived was because they didn't want to draw attention to where they were going. So followers would leave from different airports at different times. And once people got there, they literally would spend 18 hours a day building structures, putting in irrigation, digging wells. They moved into the jungle with literally nothing but trees and fruit. And the fruit was really all that people were living on. There was like no other food really available until people started bringing things over. So it's just really quite incredible that these people were able to build the community that they did. And once Jim Jones arrived and his followers were totally isolated, things descended into ultimate depravity. Jones held frequent white knight drills, which were false suicide drills, where he would test his members' loyalty by calling a drill and seeing if people would drink laced punch in order to complete suicide. And he would do this just to see who was really committed to him. He kept his members up 24 hours a day listening to his paranoid ramblings, which were just creating such a toxic environment, and they only increased in chaos due to Jones's alleged increase in drug consumption. People say that he eventually would always wear those black sunglasses that are, really iconic of Jim Jones, really, because his eyes were always bloodshot. I think there's a quote somewhere where he said himself maybe that it was like the heavenly light that came out of his eyes was too powerful for people to see. Some kind of wild quote around why he wore the sunglasses, but it's also alleged that it was because of drugs. Eventually, distressed family members who couldn't get in touch with their loved ones, who didn't know if they were okay after they'd left for South America, started getting in touch with Congress about their missing family members. You know, where are they? Are they okay? Can somebody go and check on them? They're still American citizens. So eventually, Congressman Leo Ryan agreed to fly over there with a news team from NBC. And members of the group spoke about this paradise that they had built to the NBC News team, and they spoke of their thankfulness to their leader, Jim Jones. Soon, however, members began passing discreet notes to the camera people asking for help. Eventually, Ryan and his team would leave the jungle to return to the private airstrip, but Jones had sent scouts after them with weapons. As Ryan and his NBC News team were boarding their aircraft, they were shot, and 5 died during this attack, including Leo Ryan himself, and Don Harris, Bob Brown, Greg Robinson, and even a People's Temple member, Patricia Parks. Future Congresswoman Jackie Speier was also shot during the attack, but she did survive. She went on to talk about it and actually do a lot of reform work around cult awareness, which I think is hugely significant considering what she went through. She really took steps to make changes around legislation and put a spotlight on all of the stuff that comes with cult education. Following this fallout that happened at the airstrip, Jim Jones went on a final rampage. He spoke over the sound system about how the time had finally come and that his doomsday prophecy was playing out and that the government had come to take everything from them. You can also listen to this on the internet. It's quite harrowing to listen to because you can hear the people in the background actually having their lives taken. So it's really, I didn't listen to all of it, and I don't suggest that other people go and listen to it unless they need to for research purposes. He told his followers that it was time for them to take their own lives before others could come and do it for them. It was the biggest tragedy in terms of the death toll that the world has ever seen in terms of cults as we know them in this definition. I know that some people will say, well, look at religious and spiritual wars and how many people have died from wars around scripture, but this was such a significant event. It was the single largest mass murder-suicide in American history. Members drank a combination of Flavor Aid mixed with potassium cyanide, with others forcibly injected if they wouldn't drink it. This included all of the children. On November the 18th of 1978, 909 people died at the hands of Jim Jones and the People's Temple. 304 of these victims were children. Among the dead included Jim Jones, who died of a single gunshot wound, supposedly self-inflicted. We take this day to remember all of those victims. And there is actually a memorial that's dedicated to the victims of Jim Jones. That includes a yearly get-together where survivors of the event and their family members, including relatives of those who died in the tragedy, they get together to remember these people. And there is also a website that is dedicated to looking at those names. So I'm just going to bring that up for you here if it works. Hello? websites. Oh. Strange, it's not coming on now. For some reason. Is it this? No? Oh, sorry people, having a bit of a struggle. Which is no good. Considering that all of my cult news stuff is on the try this. Very strange. Oh, it's like Inception. Okay, well that's my writing. I turn that off and that goes off. And then my websites are supposed to pop up, but they don't. Maybe I can just re-add them. I will try that now. Let's go to... Sorry, people. Oh, gosh. Oh. Is that... No, that's not what we want, is it? Delete that. Sorry. Let me get this up and then try again. This is the first time I've used OBS, so you'll have to bear with me. There we go. Okay. Okie dokie. To put it here. Make it a bit bigger. A little bit bigger that side. Oh, no, not that one. There we go. I'll just keep it like that. Okay, so you can see on this website that there is a huge list of individuals. There we go. We just make it a little bit bigger. Sorry. Okay, I think we're there. I think we're there. Yes, the Crusades. Yep, that's kind of one of the things I was thinking about, but right, okay, there we go. So gonna go over to here. This is the Jonestown Memorial List. It talks about how 918 people died that day, including the team that were there with Leo Ryan. But this is really harrowing to look at because actually there is a list of names and it just goes on and on and on and on. There are so many people listed here that were victims of Jonestown on that day. And the really, really, really heartbreaking thing about this is that there were so many Jane and John Does. Look at all these names. These are all, every single individual had their life, had loved ones, had people that knew them, grew up with them, people that have had experiences with these people, that love these people. It's just absolutely heartbreaking. And that is why today is Cult Awareness Day. And that is why we are doing this live stream today to recognize these people. Just going to bring up the chat on my phone so that I can do the next segment, which is cult news. Cult news. So, Cult News 14 today is going to be the 4th installment, and it's really going to be quite a short one because I'm doing it whilst I'm speaking to everybody, so it's quite hard to toggle. But we're going to start with Tony Ortega and the Underground Bunker, who are the first-hand reporters on the Danny Masterson trial that is currently unfolding. So the jury have been in deliberation. This is the 3rd day now. And it's been reported by by Judge Olmedo today that if we haven't been told anything but directly by the end of the day, that we will be coming back after a couple of weeks because of Thanksgiving. There we go. Judge Olmedo has made it official. If deliberations continue beyond today, they will skip the entire Thanksgiving week, which is pretty significant because people are worried about the Church of Scientology's tactics around scaring individuals that are on the jury. But the jury broke early for lunch today, and I feel like that might be an indication that there is going to be a verdict any minute. So who knows? It might come whilst we're live on air, which would be really interesting because people would get to see my reaction. So that's where the Danny Masterson trial stands. It's been unfolding for a number of weeks. And I'm really grateful to Tony Ortega from the Underground Bunker, who was reporting on Scientology for decades. And you can sign up to undergroundbunker.org for all your updates on Scientology. It's pretty significant still because Jane Doe 2 and 3 are actually going to be taking Scientology and Danny Masterson through a civil case, which they have legendary litigator David Boys helping them with that. So Scientology is going to be in the media for a little while longer, I think. Of course, Leah Remini's been making a lot of noise about the unfolding events. She's been asking again, where is Shelley Miscavige? And then made a tweet thread, which the LAPD then decided that they wanted to comment on and got loads of the information wrong, which I think is really telling of either how much sway Scientology has over LAPD or how lacking the LAPD are in their actual investigation into Scientology and the disappearance of Shelley Miscavige. So that's Tony Ortega. We'll refresh this just in case there's any news. No news. And in the same courthouse, the very same courthouse just down the corridor, you've got the Harvey Weinstein trial playing out. So this article on Variety.com details that the prosecution has closed its arguments, has rested its case. And although Harvey Weinstein is already serving a 23-year sentence for charges of sexual assault, he is facing 7 new charges that could add an extra 60 years to his sentence if he is convicted. Multiple Jane Does have come forward to detail their harrowing experiences with Harvey Weinstein. So we will keep you up to date on any further fallout from the Harvey Weinstein case or updates as soon as we have them. So in the world of cryptocurrency this week, it's really gone wild. This is Sam Bankman-Fried. He's like one of the richest men in the world. He is like a multi-billionaire. And he founded a cryptocurrency called FTX, which he also turned into an exchange. I might get some of this terminology wrong, but Sam Bankman-Fried made his billions from basically leveraging his coin holders' money. So he did a video condemning the banks in 2008 of leveraging people's money and losing all of it, and then everybody had to bail the banks out. He then, a few years later, went on a show to talk about how he made his money, where he perfectly describes a Ponzi scheme. And from that, he went on to leverage people's money and then lost it all. So his response to all of the events that have unfolded was a series of tweets that just said, "I'm sorry." So this article on Bloomberg.com really just details where this guy came from, how he made his money, and why the FTX coin has and the exchange have become bankrupt, basically, and why customers have lost so much of their money. Interestingly, on top of the Ponzi scheme, there was this house in the Bahamas that Bankman-Fried was running, where all of his workers were seen by a private doctor that he hired who would prescribe them uppers. And these uppers would allow the staff to work really long hours a day. And basically, he never wanted them to sleep. There was a load of people that lived at this house that were supposedly all intimate with one another. And this CoinDesk article by Tracy Wang just really goes into what people were up to in the Bankman-Fried house. A load of people tried to leave the house in the Bahamas, but were stopped by airport security. And people are wondering if there are going to be legal ramifications for basically this widespread fraud. So we'll have to keep up to date with the Ponzi scheme that lost people so much money, but also the small occultic environment that seemed to exist inside this house that people were living in as well. So interesting. Moving on to the US Sun. Now, I should note here that I'm in Liverpool, and people in Liverpool don't buy the Sun, don't read the Sun. They have actually boycotted the Sun. If there is a shop that stocks a newspaper, people don't buy it. So I'm a bit uncomfortable using Sun articles, but occasionally they do come up and report on things that others don't. There's probably a reason for that. But anyway, this is the US Sun, and this article by Britta Zeltman talks about how an alleged cult leader killed a woman during a type of ritualistic sex act. He went on to cut his own throat with a razor blade at his own trial. You can click here to watch the video, which of course I'm not going to do. It just goes on to detail how Aubrey Trail, aged 56, was an alleged cult leader who took the life of Sydney Loof, aged 24, and she was found dismembered in 2017. It goes on to state that there was some cult-like behavior involved with some questionable ritualistic and unusual sex practices around things like witchcraft, vampires, and that's been reported by the Lincoln Journal Star in some more details. Oh. The Los Angeles Blade has reported this week that Joe Rogan claims being a trans individual is having a cult-like mental illness. So I haven't listened to this episode. I don't know if it's being taken completely out of context, but Alex Patterson and Alyssa Tyrell have reported for Los Angeles Blade that during an interview with anti-trans pundit Matt Walsh, Walsh said that all transgender identities are invalid. And then apparently Joe Rogan went on to say that it is a mental condition that is a cult-like mental illness. Again, I haven't listened to the episode, so I can't comment on how it actually sounds, but we'll take it for granted. We'll take it for That's not what I meant to say. But we'll take it as it is. If anybody has listened to the episode and heard that line said differently, like maybe he said it as a question, like, are you saying people that identify as trans have a mental illness? Like, I haven't listened to it, so I couldn't say. BlackAmericanWeb.com has an article by India Money, who has written about ex-Yeezy team members say that living with Kanye West was like being in cult-like conditions, and they were fired for wanting to listen to the artist Drake. They said that when they came forward at their job and said that they wanted to listen to Drake, they risked being fired, and that being around Kanye West was like being in a cult. The Oxford Mail has an article that was published on the 6th of November that talks about how the voice of a 90s hit show titled Eurotrash has had a recent member of that show come forward detailing how he was sexually abused by his mother and eventually became involved in a cult called Opus Dei. Johnny Dawkes, who was raised in Didcot and groomed by a spiritual advisor, has released a memoir this week depicting his experiences in Opus Dei. It's titled Shadow Man: Records of a Life Corrupted, and it is available for purchase right now. The Sun US again has a report by Luke Kenton that details some recent news in the Lori Vallow Daybell case. JJ Vallow's grandmother has stated, "Go to hell." She says that Lori Vallow Daybell's practices or beliefs around the dark spirit stuff is bullshit, and also talks to the Sun about what should happen to Lori Vallow Daybell at trial. Kay Woodcock, grandmother of JJ Vallow, goes on to talk about the events that unfolded, which started, well, it didn't start, included the death of her own son before the death of her grandchild, all at the hands of Lori Vallow Daybell. Talks about how Lori Vallow went to Hawaii to get married to Chad Daybell, whose own wife had just died. If you haven't heard about this case, it's so convoluted and absolutely harrowing. There was a widespread nationwide manhunt or person hunt for these two children that disappeared, and they were eventually found deceased in the backyard of Chad Daybell, who used to be a gravedigger. He was part of the LDS church, and there's this really skewed belief system inside Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow Daybell around how they were to usher in the new age. They needed to get together 144,000 people that would be protected from the end times, and it's just horrible. And on the surface, it seems like two narcissists just really feeding their own ideas of grandeur, and the deaths appear on the surface again to just be monetarily motivated. It's really horrible. But Kay Woodcock just goes into details here in this Sun article about how she hopes that Lori Vallow Daybell rots in jail, and that she really just wants this to be behind her. There are so many other deaths involved in this story. I've done hours and hours of coverage on Lori Vallow Daybell, talking about JJ Vallow and his older sister, Tylee Ryan, both of who we also remember today on this day of cult awareness. The Daily Record has an article by Mark McGivern that talks about Anthony Holloway being named as part of Scotland's Sikh dogfighting cult. So this is a really prevalent underground scene in Scotland, and apparently Anthony Holloway trained his own string of fighting dogs in steel cages. There are details in this case that are really really quite difficult to read. Pictures of where these dogs were held, details on how they were trained, and how this man can be expected to have legal charges brought against him regarding his involvement. They use like a really sophisticated messaging system to send coded messages to one another, these other leaders of dog fighting pits in Scotland, on where the next things are going to take place and, you know, what types of dogs will be fighting. And they use code words and things to get their messages around. So it really is an underground network that I anticipate is made up of many, many people. True Crime Daily reported a couple of weeks ago that Mark Burns, who is a former tennis coach who was accused of being in a relationship with a 16-year-old, amongst other crimes of a sexual nature, in 2007, he fled law enforcement and people couldn't find him anywhere. It turns out that he was later found actually within the religious community of the 12 tribes working at a yellow deli. So I think it's common knowledge that children work at these yellow delis, that children are within these isolated communes away from outside influence within the 12 tribes. And to house a predator really shows how there needs to be more vetting and due diligence around the types of individuals that are accepted into religious groups. Even if that person claims to have changed, even if that person claims to have given themselves to God, whatever religious or spiritual reasoning that they give for seeking asylum. And maybe they never spoke about their history in the first place, but like we have DBS checks over here to vet our teachers after what happened with the deaths of Holly and Jessica, we have to have some type of system in place that stops these predators from fleeing one isolated environment to another. That's how these abusers fly under the radar for so long. He fled in 2007 and has just been caught this month. That is ridiculous. He's 70 years old. So I don't offer a lot of opinions when I'm doing the news, but that is one of my opinions. And I stick with it. So that's True Crime Daily. And The Vow Season 2, Episode 5 came out this week. Thank you to one of my extra special listeners for sending me a link for that. It was probably the most difficult episode of the season so far, which is saying something considering the content of the entire series has been quite difficult to digest. This episode really highlighted the absolute depravity of Keith Raniere as an individual and his disgusting hypocrisy. It was hard to watch an entire family be weaponized by somebody who had this level of standing within the community that he had cultivated, along with the help of other people who were complicit. And there's been some interesting conversations taking place over on Twitter. I'm not sure how long you'll be able to go and take a look at those conversations amidst the talks of Twitter shutting down and all this information coming from different places. Musk said yesterday that they've had their highest level of interaction ever, and then some people are saying today that it's disappearing. I'm not sure. But my takeaway from season 2 of The Vow so far is that it's really showing the awfulness that people went through, and the reenactments of the court scenes are really beautifully done. I think that there should be something said about that, and hopefully some of Raniere's supporters and sympathizers will watch this series and perhaps realize that they themselves have been victims of coercive control and still are, until they decide to walk away from him. So I think there's one episode left to come out for season 2, making it a 6-part series, which leads me on to talking about Orgasm Inc., The Story of One Taste, the recent documentary that has landed on the streaming giant Netflix. I watched the documentary. I felt like there was a lot missed out based on interviews that have taken place on the podcast with former members. I think one thing that they did well, I'm going to say probably the only thing that there's 2 things I think the documentary did well. Personally, I think that the first thing the film did well was talk about the body positivity and sex positivity that some people experienced as members of this group. When I spoke to a former member on the show, she said that it was the first time it really encouraged her to appreciate and love her body and her image and her womanhood. And I think that that's really powerful, especially in this day and age when the standards of beauty are just unrealistic, and also where there's still a level of purity even outside of religious environments where people are perhaps discouraged to explore their bodies and understand how their bodies work. So I think that was done well. I also appreciated the focus on individuals talking about their difficulty in reintegrating into typical life, engaging in conversations without using cult lingo, which was extremely difficult and often felt people feeling alienated from typical society. And also the questions around like, why didn't you just leave? Or why did you join a cult? Which, of course, we understand just feed into the misconceptions of individuals that are victims of cultic abuse. And also, people can't just leave. I mean, that, if you can walk away from a group with 0 repercussions, I doubt it's a cult. I'll just say that on that one thing. But other than that, there was really no explanation for how the groups went from practicing orgasmic meditation to all having sex together. Which, by the way, I feel like this wasn't separated in the documentary. Orgasmic meditation was not about sex. It literally was about the 15-minute meditation session of touching a woman's clitoris in a certain way for a certain length of time. It was not about sex. It wasn't about having sex. But immediately from basically the beginning of the documentary, that's what it made it feel like. It made it feel like it was selling sex. Individuals gave first-hand testimony in the documentary about how, they'll never let me join because I'm this type of person and these beautiful women won't want to have sex with me. It just really seemed to descend into, selling sex. And then it really didn't explain how all of the people started living together either in shared housing, and how those people all worked for One Taste and what the work conditions were like. I know that Ruan, who has been on the show, on the podcast, spoke a little bit about how he wasn't paid and the financial abuse that he experienced. But amongst a load of other things that I think the documentary didn't do properly, there's been some scandal that's come out recently on how Netflix themselves have used in the documentary footage that they did not get permission for. So I'm just going to play this video and you can see what I mean about the scandal. Sorry. So that was something that has been in the news this week. Controversy around the One Taste documentary, which I just thought was interesting to highlight. So that is the cult news for this week. I'm just going to check to see if there's any updates on the jury for the Danny Masterson trial. There's been no update for the last hour now, so I'm sure that the day will be coming to an end soon, around 4:30 in LA. So hopefully we will see today a verdict. I really hope that it's a guilty verdict on all counts. I wouldn't like to see a hung jury. I wouldn't like to see a not guilty verdict. But we'll see how that plays out. So what I'm going to do is just sort of a Q&A for the last 5 or 10 minutes before I leave the stream. So if there's anything that people want to talk about, then let me know. Somebody said that you can't hear me. Is that still the case? Just waiting to see. Just check here to see. It says that my mic's picking up sound. We'll see. Anyway. Oh, good. Great. So thank you for those who tuned in and stuck around for the stream. I appreciate you all tuning in to have a chat with me. I was only going to do an hour, but it's been a lot longer than that because I think people ask questions in the chat and I just go on a really long-winded spiel about stuff that makes no sense. And I hope that this episode has been interesting or helpful for people. If you haven't yet, please consider hitting the like and subscribe button for my YouTube channel. Just being here today and typing comments is really, really helpful. Scuba, hello. I didn't see you in the chat there. Oh, thank you for dropping in. Do you recognize any cult-like behavior in political parties? There's been a lot actually regarding the UK. I said something about this in one of the cult news episodes. So Liz Truss, the controversy that happened with the former Prime Minister, it included a lot of media outlets calling the Conservative Party a cult and how basically they strong-armed Boris Johnson into leaving the position of Prime Minister and then almost like decided to invite him back in, like we don't live in a democracy. Really interesting. So there is some stuff around cult-like activities within the mass media, and I think it's interesting when you read stuff about America because the Democratic Party call Trump a cult leader and then the Republican Party call people that are part of the Democratic government part of child sacrificing cults that worship Satan and sacrifice babies and quite wild accusations. So I definitely do recognize cult-like behavior in political parties, but I also think that the misconception of the term cult actually allows for newspapers to spread misinformation even more than they do already. If that makes any sense, a lot of listeners will know that I'm not great at articulating myself when I'm trying to say something that I'm thinking about, but this has been a thought of mine for a while. I really think that by throwing the word cult out there, you're creating like a level of expectancy or a level of or a label really, and this is what a lot of cult apologists or sociologists of certain areas of study will actually say it's incorrect to use the term cult because this is the outcome. This is what happens. You call the Democratic Party a cult. If you read that in your newspaper that you read every day, where they've, to you reported accurately for, 20, 25 years of you reading that newspaper, then you just think, okay, well, the Democratic Party must be a cult then. So that's an interesting question, and I appreciate that, Steve. Hi, Susan. So great to see you. Thank you for dropping in. You've found us at the Q&A final section of the live stream. So if there's anything that you would like to ask, feel free to pop it in the chat. Duco says, did you read what's about cults in France to them? Poultry reports to the UK is in form of interest. I haven't read it yet. It is on my list, and I do need to add it to my list of resources on the Cult Vault website as well. What I really find interesting about the difference between France and the UK, in my mind, is I go back to when France wanted to raise the age of retirement, and the whole country descended into absolute chaos. There were petrol bombs being thrown everywhere. There were strikes, there were riots, and eventually France just kind of said, okay, we won't do it. Whereas in the UK, everybody just kind of went, oh no, and then they raised the age of retirement. I know it's difficult to protest over here. It's difficult to protest in a lot of Western countries, but France just kept on going. So I'm not saying that I endorse violence. I don't think that I endorse any damage to property or other people or animals or anything. But I really do think that there's certain ways, you have to really stick with what you believe in. And I think a lot of the time in the UK, people just kind of bury their heads. Although we do have the law around coercive control, so there is that to consider as well. That is something that we do have that not a lot of countries have, and hopefully they will roll that out into the wider public at some point. So we'll see. Also, there was something that I wanted to finish up with today. So if anybody has any last questions, let me know whilst I read this last section out. But I have spoken about various different religious, political, social cults in today's episode, at least in the first part. But I think what's important to mention around all of the stuff that I talked about regarding historical events in infamous cults, like the mass suicide in Jonestown, it's also incredibly important to think about those who have died under strict religious policies and doctrine. For example, the Jehovah's Witnesses and their blood doctrine, or Christian Scientists who don't believe in modern medicine, who feel like they can heal their own bodies through their religious texts and interpretations of those texts by Mary Baker Eddy. People who have experienced medical neglect because of any extreme belief. We should be thinking today on Cult Awareness Day of other extreme religious groups like the 12 Tribes, the Quasi-Ubuntu, the Independent Fundamentalist Baptists who encourage systemic beating of children. Groups that are notorious for labour trafficking and child labour trafficking, like the Move of God or the Unification Church, or groups who weaponize sexuality to abuse children and others, like the Children of God. People who weaponize women's bodies with things like pregnancy and forced polygamy, like in the FLDS. Groups that encourage quiverful families as a means of control and dependency so that you are further unable to escape from those groups. Groups that encourage sterilization so that your commitment is only ever to the leader, like Synanon or Heaven's Gate or the Rajneesh movement or Nexium. Political cults where followers have taken part in violent acts. Therapy cults and alternative medicine that has led to people dying, like in Scientology. To those existing in groups that are not yet identified in the mainstream as cults, but they still exercise the same types of coercive control. To those in intimate partnerships, families, work environments, university halls, where people are still experiencing undue influence. Creating this dialogue around coercion, I mean, it's so important. And if Cult Awareness Day can't do that, then what day of the year can? There are hundreds and hundreds of groups that I haven't mentioned here, from MLMs to fitness cults, where people can go to a yoga studio and found themselves wrapped up in something nefarious, to cycle classes, to crypto schemes and large group awareness training. I think it's important to continue contributing to the exposure of these groups through live streams, Q&As, questions, blog posts, podcasts, memoirs, books, movies, TV shows. Any avenue that we can access to do this work is incredibly important. And you just being here on the stream or watching this video back is adding to that. And so I just really wanted to end on saying that although we've talked about some of the groups that are infamous for the death toll, there are groups that exist all around us right now that are still considered cults, where people are dying. Sometimes people escape these groups and they still lose their life because they struggle too much to reckon with what they've experienced, or trying to make a life outside of that environment, especially individuals who have been born into these groups with a predetermined personality, no family or friends on the outside, or no place to, run away to and escape from, no way of getting any money, no way of getting hold of their legal documents. It really just, the list is extensive. And so it's a day to recognize all of those things and all of those people, and make a point of having a conversation today about a different cult leader, a person who's escaped from one, sharing around source material, resources, signposting people to places where they can get information. I think that's really, that's the most magical thing that we can do. And I think it's great. If you're doing that work, let's go get a coffee and have a chat. I'd love that. So, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. And if anybody has any last questions, I'm going to log off in probably a minute or two. I'll put the links to everything I've talked about in the description once I finish this as well. Thank you. Thank you so much. Juko, you're always here supporting me in all of my work, and I appreciate that. I recognize it, and I really, really appreciate it. And I appreciate you. So thank you so much. And everybody else that's been here today. And I am going to log off. So I will speak to you all soon. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your speaker, Casey, and this has been The Cult Vault.